as hard as you pursue them, some of them aren't going to go anywhere, or you're going to have to find another avenue. So, literally, disappointment is not something to be feared.
One of the most common questions I get asked is, how is SpaceX so successful? How are they so far ahead of everyone else, basically, in the space industry? And hard work definitely has something to do with it. But I would actually say, in my opinion, a bigger part is how they approach problems and always have a new way of looking at things that have been plaguing the industry for years and come up with very creative solutions. And so I know last week's episode was focused on creativity, but I really think this idea of thinking creatively is such an important topic that I actually wanted to devote 2 episodes in a row to this really critical element of having high performing teams. My guest this week is Kassi Kincaid. Kassi is a leading expert in creative leadership. She is a speaker, trainer, and author committed to helping people leverage their creativity to lead with greater impact and innovation. Her journey from building a grassroots literacy project to inspiring professionals across industries fuels her mission to equip leaders and teams with practical creativity frameworks that spark innovation, increase engagement, and drive meaningful change. In this week's episode, we really dive into her 5-part framework and give leaders practical steps that you can take to improve the creativity of your teams. I really think her framework really matches with the things I've seen in successful organizations, because the thing that makes it different is it's much less output focused and more focused on creating a continuous process and cultivating a mindset of creativity. Before we get into the discussion, if this is your first time listening to the show, I do have to remind you to make sure you subscribe so that you never miss a future episode. And if you happen to be someone who is responsible for developing leaders in your organization, I would love for you to reach out to me, Matt at bettereverydaystudios.com, to see if there are things that we can work together on to make the leaders in your organization better. With that, let's get into the discussion with Kassi Kincaid. Kassi, welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. How are you doing today?
Hi, Matt. I am wonderful. Thank you so much for having me out. I'm excited about our conversation today.
I am too, and thank you so much for doing this on relatively short notice. Actually, for the listeners, it's funny. If you follow the feed, then last week we had a discussion on creativity, and that had been one that I'd planned for a couple weeks, and it was a good friend of mine. And then it just so happened that immediately after I recorded that episode, we had kind of like an intro call together where we were just getting to know each other. And as we were talking about it, I find out about your book and all this creativity. I couldn't pass up an opportunity to just do a double header about creativity on the feed. So thank you for your flexibility and being able to jump in so quickly.
Oh, my pleasure. Happy to do it.
Yeah. So I'll start this off kind of similarly to the way I started off the previous conversation, because I do think generally, like all words, everybody has their own idea of what a word means. I think creativity, very often, people tend to think about it from more of a, artistic realm or something like that. When you think about creativity, what comes to mind? What do you mean when you say creativity?
Absolutely. And you're so right. Creativity is one of those kind of abstract words. What I define creativity as is simply seeing the same picture with a different perspective. It's not about changing the situations or necessarily even creating something brand new. It's really a lens that we can put over the situation, the project, whatever it is, and see it in just a different way.
That makes sense, because I think since we've gotten to know one another, I've been, looking at some of the things that you've spoken about and that you've written, and if I'm remembering correctly, I think you referred to creativity as more of like a process or a
Mhm.
practice. Is that right?
That's right. So creativity, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, later on in the conversation,
Yeah.
but it's really a cycle and one that really never ends. We don't just have one creative project, one creative thought, and then we're just done for the rest of our lives. We're constantly in this kind of like creativity flow, if you will. And I've discovered from
Yeah.
my own experience and journey different steps of that cycle. And we can get into that a little bit later. But you're absolutely right. It's one big cycle, and one sometimes you're having those same cycles in between like a lot of other ones going on in your life.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting the things that are connected in my brain right now. I actually just finished reading a book called I think The NVIDIA Way, which is about NVIDIA, obviously, which is
Mhm.
a company that, certainly 5 years ago and maybe even today, a lot of people haven't heard of, but they're the most valuable company in the world because they're making these microprocessors, the chips that AI is basically built on top of right now.
Um,
And one of the things that I read in that book was how they don't really necessarily set traditional goals. There's not like a you set a goal and then you go after it, and then you set a new goal and you go after it.
mhm.
They talk about it much more of as a continuous process of you're always looking for the new information, looking for the new angle to try to adjust to the world. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on creativity so much for 2 weeks on the show, is because as I'm learning more about these companies, so I was at SpaceX or learning more about NVIDIA, is that this idea of just constantly looking for new angles, as you put
Mhm.
it, is core to a lot of their successes. And so I wasn't necessarily planning on diving into this right away, but since you mentioned it, the 5 steps of that process, how do you define that creative process?
Yeah, absolutely. So it all starts with, it sounds so basic, but just dumping ideas and lots of ideas. So the brainstorm, right? It all begins with an idea. TEDx. What is your world-changing idea? That one idea. And so most of the time, you just need to have a lot of ideas before one actually becomes like, okay, seems like you're gonna land on it. But that part can be tricky. It sounds so simple, right? Just like get out a you know sticky notes and just go to town. But it can be
Yeah.
really sticky because depending on your personality, if you're a realist or an optimist, you can really hinder even the first step just by like shutting things down. Because I'm a realist, and I'll admit that when ideas come up, I'm immediately thinking about all the ways that like it's not going to work. um
Hmm.
versus the optimist is just like, oh, let's do this amazing thing, but then like, okay, somewhere
Mm.
reality has to come in. So the first is ideas. The second is
Yeah.
actually pursuing the idea. Sometimes we don't even take the first step. And when I talk about the first step, is literally doing the Google search, making the email, doing the phone call. Sometimes we have such big ideas, and then like it's so simple just to get started in those capacities. The third step is overcoming disappointment. And I literally say the word disappointment. I feel like it's a dun 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 kind of word in life, but it's so true. Like, as much as you have the ideas, as hard as you pursue them, some of them aren't going to go anywhere, or you're going to have to find another avenue. So, literally, disappointment is not something to be feared, it's to be expected. And so, those two are the hardest parts of the cycle because it takes a lot of grit and resilience. But then it's so vital. The fourth step is to rest. We cannot expect ourselves to just be like these creative geniuses all the time. That we need to focus on that we're taking care of ourselves. That we're taking care of ourselves physically and mentally, and so we can show up optimally for our jobs and be able to be in that creative zone. And then the last step is literally remembering where you started. It I, People maybe see memories as like these like nice things and pictures and all this stuff, but it's so vital to remember where you started, because most of the time I like to kind of describe it as climbing a mountain. And you might get halfway up the mountain and you're like, oh my word, the peak seems so unattainable, not unattainable, but like far away. But then when you look back and you're like, oh my word, like it's a long way down. So it's really important to remember uh, how far you've come so you can keep going along the process. So those are the 5 steps, and those kind of just keep going around and around until things become bigger and better.
I love these 5 steps. A couple things, I kind of want to go through each one of them one at a time, but a couple things or one big thing that stood out to me,
Mhm.
kind of to your point again of it's a process, is that there isn't necessarily a clear point of outcome
Mhm.
in those 5 steps. Very often, when you're talking about any kind of process, there's some thing that you're always aiming for that
Yes.
denotes kind of like the end of the process, or some kind of
Mhm.
outcome is expected from the process. And in yours, I don't necessarily see that, and I think exactly because it's meant to be just a continuous cycle. Am I reading that right?
Oh, absolutely. So, and I love that even in the beginning, you mentioned NVIDIA and they don't have like set goals and outcomes because that is what creativity is. Sometimes you really don't want set goals and outcomes because sometimes
Yeah.
the creativity grows so big that it surpasses even like your wildest goals. So you really don't even want to set some in the first place.
You're reminding me of a quote that I've been meaning to, I don't know, copyright for like a decade that I came up with back when I was first starting out in triathlon. And I don't know where this phrase came from, but I've repeated it a lot since then. It's, you can't imagine what you can do until you do more than you can imagine.
Mhm.
And I think that's really the heart of what you're saying is sometimes it's like the old Henry Ford quote where he said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Where
I
there is
love
just,
that.
you, yeah, it just expands and expands. Going through a few of these ideas really quickly. This first one of dumping ideas. You mentioned how for some people that's the hardest part,
Mhm.
and you mentioned a couple different like kind of personality traits. What are there any practical ways you have seen this, or like real life situations where you've seen this really impede people and make it difficult to just get ideas out there? Because on its face, it seems like that should be the easiest step,
Yeah.
but I can imagine it's sometimes the hardest.
This one's really funny, and I saw this way back even in my early career as a preschool administrator. Is Yeah, I think we are just our own hindrances, honestly, Matt. And it's we have to unlearn that. um
Mm,
I know I did. And being in leadership, so my sister was the director, I was the administrator. And when we would come together for our leadership meetings, this is my favorite story to tell, that she was the big idea man. She was the optimist. She was always seeing how to do things better. And I
yeah.
loved her for that. But then immediately I would come in right behind her and be like, I don't know if we have the staffing for that. Do we have the budget? Like thinking of all the logistics,
Mm,
which are so vital and important. You can't just have the big idea man, wanting to do all these incredible things, but they're never going to come to life because of the situation. And then she was like, you're being such like a killjoy, like basically like this no fun anymore. And so I had
yeah.
to realize in myself, these are actually good ideas. Let's come in the middle and see how we can make them happen realistically
Yeah.
with all the
Yeah.
resources. So I would say we are our biggest hindrances.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know for me, I think the way I personally see it in myself is, I'm working on writing a book right now, and I've written a lot before, and very often the challenge is getting past any one idea so that you can
Mhm.
write down the next idea. Because it's like you write it down, you're like, oh, but I want to tweak that, or oh, that's not quite perfect. And you wind up spending 4 hours like rewriting a single paragraph. And is that really the point of what you're trying to do right now? And it is so often just about pushing, just getting stuff out there so that you can have that discussion, and whether it's the, as you mentioned, like the realist in us or the perfectionist in us that makes all those limitations. I want to actually go in a totally different direction than I originally said we wanted to,
Let's go.
because I love these five just things so much. And since this is a podcast primarily aimed at helping managers lead their teams, specifically to this idea of getting better at dumping ideas,
Mhm.
what are ways that you've seen? How can a manager of a team, a leader of a team, make it so that their team feels more comfortable with this idea dumping?
So there's two ways. First, I love the timer because when
Mm,
you put constraints, then it actually allows for more creativity. Because I'm horrible.
mm-hmm,
I'm very much like you said, Matt. Like, let me write down one idea and then let's start like analyzing and dissecting. And you're like, oh, I only have one idea. So
mm-hmm,
yes, the
mm-hmm,
timer is amazing. You would be probably amazed at what
mm-hmm.
you can like not get out of your team. That sounds bad, but receive from your team from a 5 to 10 minute timer. Just get ready, set, go. And two, when you make it, we are actually going to implement some of these ideas. Like we're going to take the top one or two or whatever it is. Then the excitement of actually seeing one of these ideas come to life, I think puts more um, excitement and into the team, and not just, oh, it's
Mm,
just going to be another brainstorming session. We'll see if one of these ideas
yeah,
happens over the next 5, 10 years or in my career time. So I think the urgency of both getting it out in a few minutes and then
yeah,
actually implementing one of those ideas will
yeah.
really enhance the morale of the team.
I love this idea of constraining time in both ways, especially that second half. Any software engineer is going to be familiar with this idea of hackathons and how you bring together and it's about solving a bunch of problems, but the whole point is actually implementing code, getting stuff out there. Because yeah, having ideas is great and all, but unless you are like actually doing something with those ideas, then you're really quickly going to be demotivated to
Mm-hmm.
come up with any more. I also was thinking of just on this idea of idea dumping. Again, I'm in kind of a writing space, and I
Yeah.
think this research came from Daniel Pink. I'm not sure, but I know that there was a study where they had two groups of individuals, and they said this group said they were going to be rewarded for writing for the best writing, and another group was told they were going to be rewarded for having the most writing.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, not only did obviously the ones who were told you're going to get rewarded for having the most writing wrote a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
but in the end they also ended up writing the best stuff
Mm-hmm.
simply because they were getting more practice at it.
Yes.
And so I think this idea of idea dumping is it's like you want to be rewarding and encouraging almost just volume. And then through the repetition of the volume of the ideas tend to get better over time anyway. So there's just lots of reasons to encourage this idea of just generating ideas.
It is a lot, and like you said, creativity, the idea dumping process, it's a lot of trial and error. And for any like
Hmm.
perfectionistics on listening to this, because I grew up a perfectionistic person, and it's okay to. It would be better to just be doing brain dumping, thinking, creating at like a B- level than being at A+ level, because at least then you're moving forward.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's all about some kind of movement forward, which again, as you said, is that idea of like putting some kind of time constraint on it as well, as of making that forward movement. And that then I think goes right into this your second step of pursuing ideas. Um, yeah, like I bring this up a lot, but this idea from Mark Randolph of he always says, it's not. Mark Randolph says not only he does the reverse of every idea is a good idea. He actually says every idea is a bad idea, but the only way to know how it's bad is if you actually test it out and start pursuing it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that teams get caught a lot in that first step of just dumping ideas, and it is difficult to move into that pursue phase?
I think the ideas, once they kind of come together and start talking about it, I have seen the ideas flow. In my workshop that I do with organizations, the Edge of Creativity workshop, we do a lot of brain dumping. But in each organization, we focus on whatever their pain points are. So whether it's healthcare,
Okay.
nonprofit, like everyone is different.
Yep.
And I love seeing the ideas just really pour out of everybody. And they
Yep.
work in teams, and sometimes it's like cross
Yep.
depart what is the word, like departmental, whatever the word is. Yeah, yeah, thank
Interdepartmental.
you. So yeah, I because there is a mixture of every group, the realist and the optimist. And
Yeah.
so I think the balance is easier in the groups. And
Yeah.
I think it's easier. So I would probably say it's harder, the pursuing part,
You're saying the creation is harder than the pursuing part?
or vice versa. So like I see a lot
Okay,
of
the pursuing
ideas,
part is
but
the hardest
then
part.
yeah, whether they go and implement that, like that's, on
Yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I was expecting because it's great to generate those ideas, and it's interesting. This is a process, and there's all kinds of mini feedback loops in here, like
Mhm.
you were saying before. You're like, it's great to create all these ideas, but then if the first time, then if you don't do anything with them, then the next time you get less ideas,
Yeah.
and then you don't do anything with those, and so then the next time you get less ideas. So when it comes to the pursuing, you already mentioned what I'm assuming is one tactic that a leader can put time constraints on themselves to say,
Mhm.
or on the team that says, okay, we're going to go do something with this.
Mhm.
What are some other tactics that you've seen that can help teams get started on these ideas?
Absolutely. So, some other things that, you know, leaders, managers can do in the aspect, I say, even if just one person, leading by example is so important. That if you're a
Mm,
team leader, that your team seeing you step out in
mm-hmm,
that creative and lead that. So,
mm-hmm,
you as a leader being creative, that will boost the whole morale of your team, but also asking your team how to be creative and not just being like, oh, this is an open, environment. Feel free
mm,
to come to us with any suggestions. A lot of people are
yeah,
introverted. You're going to have
yeah,
the raw, challenging person, not challenging personalities, but like that kind of are more bent to challenge the status quo. But people are introverted. And so asking, hey, Courtney, are there any, I loved your opinion on this. Can you, because
yeah,
people have a lot of ideas that they're not necessarily, maybe not even, they might feel comfortable, but a lot of people, if you ask them, you will get a better response because people will
yeah,
answer you. So I would say those two
yeah,
things: lead, be the first one to step out, and whatever the project or whatever, lead it, be that creative leader, and then to ask point blank for people's
yeah,
ideas. I think sometimes we think of the meetings, around the conference table and let's have these brainstorming sessions, but having those in conversations one on one with people can be very, very beneficial to the organization.
I'm sure, especially on this idea of actually pursuing the ideas, that
Mhm.
questioning is really important because I think one of the biggest struggles that you have to overcome as a leader, especially a new leader, is this idea that you're supposed to have the answers. So, maybe you sit down with your team and you do this brainstorm,
Mhm.
and then there's all these ideas, and like you're supposed to be the one who knows what to do with all of these ideas or how to take action on any of these ideas. And so the creativity flows through the whole process of, okay, so let me ask you, like, if we want to action on this idea, what's the first step we can take, and continuing to ask your people for that kind of input as well, I'm
Mhm.
sure helps that process move forward. So then the third step, overcoming disappointment. I don't know, for me, I would say I've had some managers who probably reinforced the disappointment in many
Oh,
ways
that's so
of like it's that idea of like, oh, why didn't that didn't turn out very well, did it? Oh my gosh, you're going to get dinged on your next performance report because that idea didn't really work out. That's obviously not what we want. What does it look like to be a good manager to help people get over a disappointment?
I think looking forward is the best way
Hmm.
to overcome disappointment. So, Matt, I have done and tried some wild things in my career. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Going from preschool administrator to leader of a global children's illiteracy program to taking my creative skills and knowledge and now like keynote speaking and workshops and all the different things. And it's been a wild ride. And I think one of the biggest things that I was working on, I guess, hardest to get into was working with NASA. And I have
Mm,
a YouTube channel for children that we pair children's books with experiences. So we go all over wherever the books take us essentially. And I had wanted to film with NASA for probably about 5 years, and so I tried like the traditional route. What is like right the first step? And it's to find like the media inquiry right on the website,
mm-hmm,
the general
mm-hmm.
information. So that was the first step. Well, it is very hard to get into NASA, federal, and then especially if you're filming, that's like even doubly worse. And so the first time I like sent an inquiry or whatever the first general step was, I don't think I heard back. Or even if I did, it
Sure.
was very, basically it's kind of all this long, 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 long wait list.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a dead end. And so I didn't pick it up for a while. And then I just saw the door eventually. I was in this Facebook group for speakers, and somebody was introducing themselves. I hardly ever get in there because who has enough time to go into like all the Facebook groups, right? I even
Yeah.
need to get better about like commenting on LinkedIn. So, aside from
Yeah.
the Facebook groups. And she was just like, "Hi, I am a spacesuit expert at NASA." And I'm like, oh my word, like, there's my door. There's my door.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
connected. She loved the idea. She was my inside person. We are still friends. That is how I got in. But she had to clear it. I thought it was all cleared. Then the person, she's like, fill out this form, whatever. Then the like the media person's like it's usually a really long process, blah
Yeah.
blah for the. I was like, oh no, I thought we were there. So she's like, put me in touch with your like contact, and like poof, that was it, and I was into NASA. So you never
Yeah.
know, you never know.
Yeah.
And it's like the optimism of what could be is what keeps me excited every time I go for like the next big thing or reaching out to the next big person about whatever. That you never know, just because you get a no, just because there's silence doesn't mean
Yeah.
it won't happen. So it's
Yes.
that really optimist, like I might get shot down 10, 20 times, but it's that one that will make it all worth
Yeah.
it.
And I think to your point, from the manager's point of view, especially if the manager has a little bit more experience or a little bit more situational awareness than the people on their team, is continuing to remind them to keep trying, and like,
Mhm.
as you said, reminding them of the big picture and reminding them of what you're trying to do, even if every idea that we try doesn't pan out. And it's interesting, kind of the scale when you say, overcoming disappointment, thinking through the ranges of. I just recently read a book on Intel, actually, and kind of they talk about like the OKR process, and the formal objective and key results process says that you should only achieve like between 50 and 70% of your objectives. Like if you're setting big enough goals,
Mhm.
like you should only meet like half of them. And so there's a lot of disappointment happening in that. But then I'm also imagining kind of like the sales world as well, and any
Yeah.
account executives or stuff, or sales development representatives. They have like a 98% failure rate when they're trying to, get into a new organization or something like that. It's all about repeatability. And so, there's a whole range there of what disappointment means. But as a manager, but moving forward always means some disappointment. You're never going to achieve it all. And that the manager, I love how you put that it really is the manager's place to kind of provide that bigger picture, that encouragement, and make sure people stay motivated to keep trying.
Absolutely. And I love that you talk about the sales teams and everything, because that's kind of what I think about is like somebody, making a bunch of phone cold calls and getting like 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 200, but it's worth it. And then
Yeah.
once you get that, like you're making every call hoping for that. And once you get it, it's like the boost, right? For like the next 200. So I love that you bring
Yeah.
that up, because it really is, you need a very small percentage to keep that fire
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. I always think, I'm not a big baseball fan, but I remember years ago I would think a lot about how, in baseball, people get into the Hall of Fame for succeeding 30% of the time.
Yeah.
right? Like if you can hit the ball 30% of the time, then you're on your way to the Hall of Fame. And so it's like, okay, like for the rest of us, like let's give ourselves a little bit of slack and keep moving forward. The last two steps, the rest and remembering where you came from,
Mhm.
what I don't know, like make that a little bit more. I'm trying to think of it. We're trying to make this a little bit more practical. What does that mean day to day, especially like from the manager's perspective, and encouraging their employees?
Mhm. So yeah, it is those two steps are a little bit seem a little bit random, right? Because it's like this isn't
Mm-hmm.
a wellness talk. But yeah, rest for the employees. I think one of the biggest things is encouraging, not necessarily encouraging people to take time off, but being excited for them when they
Mm-hmm.
take time off. And
Mm-hmm.
I had a boss like that in my, career, and she was so understanding and actually really excited for people to, whether their kid was graduating or like have an amazing time. Like don't think about work. That is incredible, right? Instead of when are you going to be
Mm-hmm.
back? Like I can't believe you're taking so much time off. We really need you here on the team. And two, really having those morale, whether it's the get-togethers, um, creating that space in the work environment, and it can
Mm-hmm.
be little things um, like relaxing music in the break room or like the air diffusers.
Mm-hmm.
You can maybe you're going to take like a rest time, but just kind of like quiet time, from 12 to 12:30 every day. You can kind of take a break and mingle or whatever it is. You can get creative about it. I'm not going to tell you how to get creative, but I think that whole rest piece, it really does trickle down to managers saying, hey, when you're off the clock, you're off the clock. I'm not going to be
Yeah.
trying to talk to you. And I think that's something I've even trying to learn for myself as being like an entrepreneur and having my own schedule as a founder and everything is like when it comes 5 o'clock, there's a lot of nights to where I work into the nights and the evenings because I just, it's me. And really signing off. And so
Yeah.
having those boundaries is vital. Like morning
Yeah.
to evening and creating that
Yeah.
culture of when you're at work, and when you're not, you're not.
Yeah, I mean, Cal Newport is one of my favorite authors. He wrote a book called Deep Work, and he talks a lot about um, creativity and productivity in the knowledge worker space. And one of the things that I truly believe is if you are really good at if you're good at like really deep work, like if you have a setup where you can like, okay, I'm going to get into flow and I'm just going to crush some work, like most, like certainly for me, most people that I know can really only be engaged like that for 3 or 4 hours in a
Mhm.
day.
Yeah.
Like it is incredibly taxing. And to try to do that for like you have to train yourself to be able to be that engaged for longer. And then on the creativity piece, one thing that I've been trying to do in my own life, I listen to podcasts all the time. I'm really trying hard to spend more time outside and walking around, not listening to a podcast,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm giving my brain a minute to not have new information pumped into it, but to just let it like sift through and process the information that's already there. To kind of give my neurons a little bit of a rest,
Mm-hmm.
so that they're ready for that next time when I want to be creative. So I definitely appreciate this idea of being restful, of being mindful of the fact that
Mm-hmm.
you can't just be on all the time, especially in a creative endeavor.
And I love how you say the walking around and everything, because there was studies done that said that if you walk even on a treadmill or outside, it stimulates the creativity. And even taking
Yeah,
vacations, the hit Broadway
yeah.
music, yeah, the hit Broadway musical Hamilton, was that idea was actually born on a vacation. So when people are taking time off,
Oh,
managers and leaders, like you are doing them a favor that they like
yeah,
will think more creatively when they come back by getting that rest.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And then this final point of remembering where you came from, I imagine that's really strongly tied to kind of this idea of thinking into the future and encouraging people. Is that a big part of it, or are there other elements to it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's this space to really have gratitude and to really that encouragement space. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
we're in like the things we're working on, the projects, whatever it is, they take a while to come to fruition. Sometimes things aren't as easy
Mm-hmm.
as, you start on Monday, you end by Friday. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's that piece of moving forward and honestly being proud of everything that we've been able to accomplish and be a part of. I mean, Matt,
Mm-hmm.
seriously, in my life, I never imagined in like my entire life that I would go from a preschool administrator to working on a passion project that would end up going on to combat illiteracy around the world. And don't even like mention the TED Talk because I'm like, seriously, this time I'm like, I did that. But like that was
Yeah.
not any of the plan of my life. Like I was happy being an administrator and then things just kind of unfolded and continue to unfold to where I honestly don't know how far and big that they're continuing to unfold, but that's what makes it fun. But so when I look back at, this has only been 6 years that I've been haven't been preschool administrator. I was like, I can't even imagine. So
Yeah.
yeah, looking back, it's like it's really cool, like the different ways our lives and our careers can go. So taking that time to kind of be still and just to think back is it just does a world of good and kind of keeps us going into the idea phase. So you kind of go from
Yep.
the remember phase, and it just kind of starts all over again.
Yep. Well, I think that's why, you had kind of made the comment that these last 2 points seem kind of out of the blue or kind of like they don't fit, but I think they fit so perfectly. The rest piece in this idea that you have to give yourself time to kind of recuperate so that you're ready for the next step. But then even the remembering piece, because this is a process that's continuously happening on all kinds of scales, sometimes
Mhm.
big scales, sometimes just small scales, it is so easy to forget where you came from. That's one of the best attributes and worst
Yes.
attributes of human beings is how quickly we adapt to the present and just
Yes.
assume this is the status quo.
Mhm.
And that's the thing where we can get into these like hedonistic death cycles or whatever they're called, where we continuously acclimate to this new level and then want more and then want more and then want more. And so we never become satisfied. That's very true in our personal lives. But then from this idea of wanting to create a creative environment,
Mhm.
you need to take that moment to just be like, appreciate what
Yeah.
you've done, and then you can also spend time to learn from that. We started there,
Mhm.
we thought we were going to go over here, and we wound up over here.
Yes.
Why did that happen? What can we learn from that process as well? So there's a lot of learnings that can come from looking backwards as well. So it's not just purely a motivational piece. There's a lot of learning about the creative process that I'm sure can happen.
It is a lot of learning and development, Matt. I mean, literally creativity, everything that whether you achieve or don't achieve and all of this kind of mess, that it is all learning. I mean, and I think we learn more from what we don't achieve or what we get disappointed about than
Mm,
whether that we actually hit the ace every time because
yeah.
it's fun. We get what we think we want, but in the long run, we're way better when honestly we don't hit that ace.
This has been a really great discussion, Cassie. I really love this process because I feel like it is so different than what I traditionally hear from like how to be creative. Again, kind of to the point I mentioned, so often I think steps of being creative, they're all driving towards an outcome rather than just a practice of something that just is. So I think this has been really, really great. I think managers are going to get a lot of practical things that they can do out of it. If people want to learn more about you and your work, where can they go?
Absolutely. So I love to connect with you on LinkedIn. My name Kassi Kincaid. You can find me real easy, or on my website at kassikincaid.com for all of my things. So yes, those are the best two places.
Awesome. Well, this has been really great. Yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and thank you so much. I'm sure we'll talk more in the future.
Thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.